The sun rose slowly over the small frontier town, painting the dusty streets with shades of gold and orange. It was a morning like any other except for the unusual energy in the air. Today was the day of the big auction, the event that brought people from miles around. Cowboys, ranchers, and townsfolk were gathering near the wooden platform at the center of town. Horses stamped impatiently, wagons rattled along the uneven roads, and the smell of fresh hay and leather mixed with the warm, dry air. The townspeople were buzzing with excitement, talking about the finest livestock, the best tools, and the strongest workers to bid on. But amid all the noise and anticipation, a quiet figure stood slightly apart from the crowd. Barely noticed by most, she was an Apache girl, slender and small for her age, with dark hair braided neatly down her back. Her eyes, however, held a quiet intensity, a spark that belied her calm appearance. She wore a simple dress, clean but plain, and her bare feet dusted with the reddish soil. She clutched her shawl tightly, a small comfort in a world that seemed ready to judge her at a glance. Despite her quiet demeanor, there was something about her that drew the attention of a few observant eyes, an air of patience, a gentle strength that she carried without knowing it. As the auctioneer began preparing the stage, calling for the first bidders and organizing the livestock, whispers floated through the crowd. Some people murmured about her heritage. Some questioned why she was even at the auction. "Half price," one man muttered to another, shaking his head. "She won't fetch anything near a proper wage. Look at her, so quiet, so timid. What could she do?" Others nodded in agreement, their eyes drifting toward the wagons and horses. Clearly preferring animals over people, the girl stood silently, trying to make herself as small as possible, yet she could feel their eyes on her. Some stared with suspicion, others with curiosity, and a few with outright disdain. She had been told by those she trusted that people in the towns often judged by what they could see, not by who someone truly was. She tried to calm the fluttering in her chest, reminding herself to be patient, to hold her head high even when it felt heavy with fear. She knew the world was not always kind to those who were different, but she also carried a quiet hope deep in her heart that someone, someday, might see her for who she really was. The auction began, and the first items were called forward. Strong horses, cattle with healthy coats, and shiny new tools were displayed. Hands shot up eagerly, and voices rang out with bids. The crowd cheered and laughed, their excitement growing with each item sold. The girl watched, noting the way people focused on what they considered valuable and overlooked those who could not speak for themselves. She could see how quickly attention shifted, how easily people were distracted by appearances and material gain. Finally, it was her turn. The auctioneer stepped forward, clearing his throat. Next, he called loudly, "Is the Apache girl, half price to start." There was a pause, an awkward silence that seemed to stretch longer than any of the other items. The crowd shifted uncomfortably, exchanging glances and whispered comments. Some chuckled nervously. "Half price? Why would anyone even want her?" one man asked, shaking his head. The girl felt her stomach tighten. She had imagined this moment many times, but nothing prepared her for the sharp sting of rejection in the air before the bidding even began. She glanced down at her hands, which were folded neatly in front of her, fingers brushing against the coarse fabric of her dress. She had learned early in life to be careful with her movements, to be polite and quiet, to avoid drawing attention that might turn into ridicule. And yet, despite her smallness, she could feel a stubborn pulse of dignity inside her. She would not cry, she would not whimper, she would simply wait. Minutes passed, and still no one raised a hand. The auctioneer's face grew tight with frustration. "Come on now," he called, trying to force enthusiasm. "She's capable, strong, and ready to work. Half price, friends. Who'll take her?" His voice echoed across the square, but the silence only seemed louder in response. The crowd's eyes shifted nervously, looking anywhere but at the girl. Some muttered excuses, claiming they were busy with other business, others pretending not to notice. Through it all, the girl remained steady, though her heart beat rapidly beneath her ribs. She had learned to hide fear, but she could not hide hope entirely. She hoped that someone might look past the surface, might see her skills, her intelligence, her resilience. She remembered her mother's gentle voice, long gone now, telling her that patience and strength often spoke louder than words. Her father's quiet lessons, too, whispered in her mind. The world may not notice the quiet, but the right person will. The crowd began to murmur, their impatience growing. Some whispered among themselves about her silence, assuming it meant weakness. Others speculated why no one would bid on her, considering it odd, even suspicious. Meanwhile, she stood still, eyes forward, not daring to speak. She did not beg, did not cry, did not try to draw attention. She simply existed. Quietly, waiting for someone to see beyond what everyone else saw. Nearby, a few young children stared curiously. They had no prejudice yet, only interest, watching the girl's calmness with wide eyes. One small boy whispered to his sister, "Why won't anyone take her?" The girl caught the comment and gave a small, almost imperceptible nod, acknowledging them without needing to speak. There was a strange power in that silence, a sense that she was not afraid to simply be herself, no matter how others judged her as the sun climbed higher. Casting long shadows across the town square, she began to feel the weight of eyes upon her even more heavily. Her fingers tightened around the shawl, knuckles whitening, yet she did not falter. Her mind focused on small things, the way the wooden platform creaked under the auctioneer's boots, the glint of sunlight on a horse's coat, the distant sound of a wagon wheel in the street. She anchored herself in the world around her, breathing slowly, trying to steady the nervous flutter in her chest. It became clear to everyone watching that the girl would not break under pressure. She had endured hardships before, grown up in a world that often overlooked her, and had survived by staying quiet, observant, and strong. People whispered that perhaps she was too timid, that perhaps there was no use in bidding on her. And yet, in that very quietness, there was a dignity that could not be ignored. Time passed slowly. The auctioneer sighed, shaking his head. He tried again, louder this time. Half price, capable, ready to work. Who'll bid? Some men looked around, unsure, unwilling to make the first move. The girl's heart pounded not with fear, but with a small, stubborn hope. She had been in situations before where the world seemed determined to overlook her, and each time she had learned to keep moving forward, one careful step at a time. Finally, as the morning sun reached its peak, a subtle shift began. One or two observers glanced more carefully, noticing the quiet composure of the girl, the careful way she held herself, the alertness in her eyes. Something about her spoke to them, even if they could not immediately name it. She was not loud or flashy, but there was a steady, unspoken strength in her demeanor, a sense that she would endure, work hard, and carry herself with dignity no matter the circumstances. The auctioneer, sensing a change, gestured toward her again. "Come on now, folks. She's worth more than her price." Someone stepped forward. The girl continued to wait, unmoving, listening to the murmurs, feeling both the sting of rejection and the quiet pulse of hope. She had survived so far by trusting in herself, and now, in this moment, she clung to the belief that someone, somewhere, would see her true value. And so, she waited. The quiet Apache girl, standing alone on the dusty auction platform, a small figure in a big, bustling world, held her head high. Though the crowd had yet to recognize her worth, and though no one had bid a single coin, there was a quiet confidence in her that could not be ignored. She waited, patient and steady, for the moment when someone would finally step forward and see not just the girl in front of them, but the heart, strength, and courage that lay within her. The quiet Apache girl remained on the auction platform, the dust swirling around her small feet with each passing movement of the crowd. The morning heat was climbing steadily, making the air thick and heavy, yet she did not move or complain. Her dark eyes scanned the crowd briefly, but she quickly looked down again, not wanting to meet the eyes that often carried judgment or pity. She had learned long ago that quiet observation was sometimes the only way to survive in a world that often misunderstood her. The auctioneer's voice boomed again, tempting to stir interest. "Come on now, folks. Half price. Don't miss out. She's capable, strong, and ready to work. But his words seemed to fall into the air like pebbles in a pond, creating ripples that faded quickly. People shifted uncomfortably, muttering among themselves. Some glanced at their neighbors, as if waiting for someone else to act first. Others laughed softly, making comments about how unusual it was for a girl to be up for auction alone, especially one so quiet. A few men shook their heads, muttering that she wouldn't be able to work as hard as a boy or a grown man. The girl felt a tightening in her chest, a mix of embarrassment and anticipation. She had expected the whispers, the judging eyes, even the outright avoidance. But the silence now felt heavier than anything she had faced before. She clutched her shawl a little tighter around her shoulders, feeling the coarse fabric against her skin, a small comfort in the middle of all the uncertainty. Her heart beat rapidly, but she reminded herself to stay calm. She had survived difficult times before and knew that fear or panic would not help her now. Some townspeople began to speak more openly, voicing opinions that the girl could almost hear, though she tried not to. "Why would anyone even want her?" one man said, shaking his head. "She's too quiet, too small. Look at Hershey, never managed the work," another added. "Half price is too high, in my opinion. She's not worth it." The words stung, but she did not let them show on her face. Her expression remained calm, her lips pressed together, her gaze steady. Inside, though, a quiet determination grew. She would not let their lack of understanding define her. The auctioneer tried another approach. He described her skills, her intelligence, and her willingness to learn. "She can manage chores, help with the livestock, and is eager to learn anything you ask," he said, gesturing toward her. "She's respectful, careful, and strong for her age. Someone will see her value. I know it." But the murmurs only grew louder in response, this time tinged with doubt and speculation. Some people thought the auctioneer was exaggerating. Others simply didn't care, focusing on the animals and tools instead. As the minutes ticked by, the girl's emotions were a mixture of hope and anxiety. She had been taught to hold her head high, even when others doubted her. She remembered her mother's gentle words. Strength is not always loud. Sometimes it is quiet, like a river beneath the rocks. And her father, long gone now, had whispered, "The world may overlook quiet courage, but the right person will see it." Those words guided her now, helping her stand still despite the heavy weight of judgment around her. A few of the younger children in the crowd watched with curiosity. They had no prejudice yet, only interest. One little girl tugged on her mother's sleeve and whispered, "Why won't anyone bid on her?" The mother shushed her, shaking her head, but the girl caught the words. A small, almost invisible smile touched her lips. Even in her quietness, she understood that someone, somewhere, might notice the strength hidden beneath her silence. Meanwhile, some of the more experienced ranchers and cowboys began to murmur among themselves. "Maybe she's sickly," one suggested, though he had not spoken to her or even observed her closely. "Couldn't handle the work," another added. Others simply shrugged, assuming someone else would bid. The tension in the air was almost tangible. The girl felt it pressing down on her, like the heat of the sun, but she did not flinch. She had learned long ago that the world could be unfair, but she could control only her own actions and attitude. The auctioneer tried to coax more interest, stepping closer to the girl and raising his voice. "She's strong, capable, and willing. Half price, folks. Someone make a bid?" His words carried across the square, but still no hands rose. The crowd seemed frozen, uncertain, as if afraid to break the silence. It was not that they could not see her, but that they did not want to recognize what they saw. Prejudice, fear of the unknown, and simple indifference kept them from acting. The girl remained perfectly still. She did not fidget, she did not beg, she did not try to draw attention to herself. Her calmness in a strange way became almost magnetic. A few people glanced again, this time noticing how patiently she stood, how steady her gaze was, how unshakable she seemed, despite the awkwardness of the situation. There was something in her quiet strength that quietly demanded respect. Even if most of the crowd did not yet understand it, Time passed, and the tension grew. Some townspeople began to lose interest, turning their attention back to the livestock and tools. Others whispered that perhaps she would remain unsold, an embarrassment to the auctioneer and a mystery to the crowd. The girl, however, did not waver. She knew that she could not control others' actions, only her own. She breathed steadily, letting her thoughts focus on simple things: the creak of the wooden platform beneath her feet, the warm sun on her skin, the distant sound of a wagon wheel along the street. She grounded herself in these small details to stay calm and collected. Then, something began to change. A few observant individuals noticed her careful posture, the way she held herself with quiet dignity. They began to see past the surface, noticing not her silence or small frame, but the alertness in her eyes, the patience in her stance, the intelligence reflected in the smallest gestures. Some of them had never encountered anyone like her before. She did not boast. She did not demand attention. Yet there was a presence about her that could not be ignored. A murmur began to ripple through the crowd. "Did you notice how steady she is?" one man whispered. "She's not like the others. She seems capable." Another nodded slowly. "Yes, quiet, but she has a strength I can't explain. She's different." The word spread quietly, and while not everyone agreed, a few more eyes turned toward her with genuine curiosity. The girl did not notice the shifting attitudes, not immediately. She remained focused on herself, her own strength, and her hope that someone would recognize her worth. The auctioneer, sensing the subtle shift, tried again. "Half price. Ready to work? Don't miss out on this capable young girl." He glanced at the crowd, hoping for even a single hand to rise. Still, most remained silent, uncertain, hesitant, or prejudiced. Yet beneath the hesitation, a new awareness was forming. Some of the men, usually quick to judge and dismiss, found themselves pausing, reevaluating their assumptions. Perhaps they thought. This girl was more than her quiet demeanor suggested. As the sun climbed higher, casting strong shadows across the square, the girl's patience was tested further. She could feel the weight of the silence pressing down, but she did not break. Her mother's words, her father's teachings, and her own quiet resilience guided her. She understood that sometimes the world was slow to notice the value of quiet strength, but that did not make it any less real. By mid-morning, the crowd began to show signs of restlessness. Some were frustrated, some confused, and a few curious. The quiet Apache girl stood unmoved, a steady presence amid the shifting attention of others. The longer she remained, the more people began to notice her quiet courage, her ability to endure without complaint, and her dignity even in a moment that could have humiliated her in the distance. A few children continued to watch with fascination. They had no bias, only curiosity, and perhaps they sensed the truth that many adults could not yet see. The girl caught their small gestures of attention and gave a tiny nod, almost imperceptible. It was a small acknowledgement, but it carried the weight of connection, a reminder that even quiet presence could inspire attention and respect. And so, the quiet Apache girl continued to stand, waiting. The silence around her was heavy, almost oppressive, but within her, a quiet hope continued to burn. She had learned to wait, to endure, and to trust that the right person would see her for who she truly was. She did not know when that moment would come. But she knew, deep inside, that it would come in, that when it did, everything might change. The sun blazed high overhead. The auctioneer called out again, and still no one bid. The girl's patience, courage, and quiet dignity were on full display, waiting for the moment when someone would step forward, break the silence, and recognize her true value. The quiet Apache girl stood on the auction platform, her small frame silhouetted against the bright midday sun. Dust rose from the bustling square, drifting lazily in the air, catching the light and making everything shimmer in a golden haze. The crowd had grown restless over the past hours. People were murmuring, frowning, shaking their heads, or simply turning their attention back to the livestock and tools. Yet, through it all, the girl remained still, her hands folded neatly in front of her, her eyes steady, calm, and patient. Her heart still beat quickly, but it was no longer from fear alone. She had learned to hold herself together in moments of tension, and now she was learning patience of another kind, the kind that comes from trusting that the right person will see what others cannot. She did not know if anyone would bid on her. She did not even know if anyone could see past the assumptions and prejudices of the crowd. But she had learned to wait quietly for moments of possibility, even when the world seemed determined to overlook her. The auctioneer's voice rose again, louder this time, tinged with frustration. Half price, ready to work, capable and strong. Will bid. He gestured toward the girl, emphasizing her presence, hoping to spark even the slightest interest. For a moment, the crowd seemed frozen. The words hung in the air, yet no one moved. People shifted nervously in their boots, exchanged glances, shrugged, and muttered under their breath. Some were embarrassed to admit that the girl's calm dignity had caught their attention, while others dismissed it entirely. Then, a subtle change occurred. From the back of the crowd, a tall figure emerged, mounted on a well-kept horse. His hat shaded his eyes from the sun, but there was a calm determination in his posture, an easy confidence that drew the attention of those nearby. He was a cowboy, known in the town not only for his skill with horses and cattle, but also for a quiet sense of fairness that set him apart from others. While many of the men around him judged quickly, he was one to observe first and understand before acting. His gaze fell on the quiet Apache girl, and something shifted in his expression. Unlike others, he did not see timidity or fear. He did not notice only the fact that she was quiet or that her price was lower than most expected. A spark of subtle, resilient strength that could not be ignored. Her stillness, her patience, the way she carried herself, despite the whispers and stares, spoke to him more than words ever could. There was an authenticity about her, a natural dignity that commanded respect without demanding it. He nudged his horse forward slightly, his eyes never leaving hers. The crowd noticed the movement, and a hush fell over them. For the first time, someone seemed ready to act. It's not out of obligation or curiosity, but because he genuinely saw the girl's value. Whispers began to ripple through the square once more, this time tinged with surprise and disbelief. "Who is that?" one man asked. He stepping forward. Another shook his head slowly. "I didn't think anyone would bid on her." The girl noticed him finally. Her eyes widened slightly, a flicker of hope lighting her expression. She had waited, patiently endured the silence, the whispers, and the judgment of others. And now, perhaps her patience was about to be rewarded. Yet she remained cautious. The world had taught her that hope alone could be fragile, easily shattered by disappointment. She took a deep breath, steadying herself, prepared for the moment when someone might finally see her for who she truly was. The cowboy dismounted gracefully, his boots crunching softly on the wooden platform as he approached the auctioneer. He looked toward the girl, giving her a small nod that was both respectful and reassuring. The crowd leaned forward slightly, sensing that something significant was about to happen. "I'll bid," he said quietly, almost under his breath, but loud enough for those nearby to hear. His voice carried a calm certainty that cut through the murmur of the crowd. A hush fell over the square. The auctioneer blinked, surprised, then raised his hand to call out, "Do I hear a bid? Who will match him?" A few men glanced at each other, uncertain, hesitant. None dared to raise a hand. The cowboy's eyes remained steady on the girl, silently communicating what words could not. He saw her, not as a commodity, but as a person worthy of respect and opportunity. The girl felt her chest tighten, a mixture of relief and disbelief coursing through her. She had stood through the murmurs, the stares, the long minutes of silence, and now, finally, someone had recognized her worth. She did not speak. She did not move forward. She simply remained still, letting the moment settle around her, feeling the warmth of someone's genuine regard for the first time in a long while. The crowd, sensing the tension, began to murmur again. Some were impressed, some skeptical, and a few openly critical. "Why him?" one man whispered. "She's not worth that much." Another shook his head. "I don't understand why he would choose her over others." But the cowboy paid them no mind. His focus was solely on the girl, and his decision was made. He could see her patience, her quiet dignity, and her strength in ways that others could not. As the auctioneer continued to call for higher bids, the crowd remained silent. No one else dared to challenge him. The cowboy's presence seemed to signal something unspoken. Respect and understanding were more important than price or convenience. Slowly, realization dawned on some of the spectators. Perhaps the girl's quiet courage and resilience were worth more than anyone had imagined. Perhaps there was value in patience, dignity, and inner strength that could not be measured in coins alone. The girl's heart beat faster, not from fear this time, but from a mixture of hope, gratitude, and anticipation. She had endured the judgment and whispers of the crowd, held herself together under scrutiny, and waited patiently for someone who could see her true worth. Now, that moment had arrived. She allowed herself a small, almost imperceptible smile, a flicker of recognition that she was finally seen. The cowboy extended a hand, not in a gesture of ownership, but of invitation. "Come with me," he said gently, his voice steady, kind, and encouraging. The girl looked at him, her eyes wide, and then down at her hands. She had learned to trust her instincts, and something about this man told her that she could. Slowly she nodded, feeling a sense of relief and cautious optimism. She would go with him, step into the unknown, and perhaps find the life she had quietly hoped for all along. The auctioneer finalized the sale, calling out the cowboy's name, and the crowd watched as the girl stepped down from the platform. Some were still skeptical, some still whispered, but a few now looked at her with a newfound respect. They could sense that something had changed, even if they did not fully understand it. The quiet Apache girl had endured the silence, waited patiently, and now, for the first time, someone had recognized her value and courage as they walked away from the platform. The cowboy and the girl moved through the crowd together. She felt a mixture of nervousness and excitement. Unsure of what awaited her, but comforted by the kindness and understanding in the man's eyes. The sun beat down on them, warm but not oppressive, and the dust swirled gently around their feet. She had survived the judgment of the crowd, the silence, and the whispers, and now, for the first time, she felt the possibility of a new beginning. The cowboy guided her toward his wagon, speaking softly. "You've been very brave," he said. "Saw how patiently you stood, how strong you were, and I knew you deserved a chance." She nodded, unsure what to say, but her eyes reflected the gratitude and hope she felt inside. She had been overlooked for so long, judged by her quietness and heritage. Yet here was someone who recognized her true value. The crowd began to disperse, some still talking in hushed tones about the unusual turn of events. The girl remained calm, her heart still racing with the mixture of fear and hope. She had endured so much, and yet now, for the first time, she felt the possibility of acceptance, understanding, and opportunity. She had waited, and someone had finally stepped forward, not out of obligation, not out of curiosity, but out of genuine recognition of her worth. As they rode away toward the cowboy's homestead, the girl's thoughts wandered. She thought of the long road ahead, the work she would do, and the lessons she would learn. She thought of the people who had doubted her and whispered, and how she had remained steady through it all. But most of all, she thought of the quiet hope that had guided her through the morning, the belief that someone, someday, would see her strength, patience, and courage. For the first time, she allowed herself to imagine a life where she could grow, learn, and be valued for who she truly was. She realized that quiet courage could carry her far, that patience and dignity had power, and that sometimes the right person's recognition could change everything. She glanced at the cowboy, grateful for his insight, kindness, and willingness to see her, and she felt a flicker of hope she had never experienced before. The sun continued to climb, the dusty road stretched ahead, and the quiet Apache girl took her first steps toward a new beginning. Her heart filled with cautious optimism, her mind open to the possibilities that lay ahead, and her spirit strengthened by the recognition she had longed for all her life. The quiet Apache girl had stepped off the auction platform and into a new world, one that was both unfamiliar and full of promise. The cowboy led her down the dusty streets of the small frontier town, past the wagons, the horses, and the curious onlookers who whispered among themselves. Some still doubted her worth. Some were still skeptical of the unusual turn of events. But for the first time in her life, she felt seen not as someone to be judged or dismissed, but as a person with potential, with strength, and with the ability to make her own way in the world. The cowboy guided her to his homestead, a modest but comfortable ranch on the outskirts of the town. The wooden fence enclosed a yard filled with grazing animals, and the gentle clatter of tools and chores filled the air. It was a place that promised work, but also care, guidance, and understanding. As they approached, the girl's heart beat with a mixture of nervousness and hope. She had never imagined a life like this, and yet, as she took in the familiar smells of horses and hay mingled with the warmth of sunlight, she felt a strange sense of belonging beginning to bloom inside her. The cowboy spoke gently as they walked through the yard. "You'll help with chores, tend the animals, and learn whatever you want," he said. "But more than that, I want you to know that your quiet strength, your patience, and your courage are valued here. I saw that today." His words were simple, yet they carried a weight she had never experienced before. No one had ever spoken to her with such respect. No one had ever acknowledged her abilities or her character. She felt a lump rise in her throat, but she forced herself to smile, letting the warmth of his words sink in. As the days passed, the girl began to adjust to her new life. She learned quickly, tending the horses and helping with the cattle, her hands steady and careful. She carried water, fed the animals, cleaned the barn, and learned to ride with a confidence she had never imagined. Each task she completed brought a quiet sense of pride, a confirmation that she was capable, strong, and worthy. The cowboy watched her patiently, offering guidance when needed, but always allowing her to grow at her own pace. The townspeople soon began to notice the changes as well. Some were surprised to see how capable she was, how quickly she adapted to the work, and how respectfully she interacted with everyone on the ranch. The whispers that had followed her on the auction platform slowly transformed into admiration, though some still spoke in hushed tones, unsure how to reconcile their previous judgments with the reality before them. Others, seeing her resilience and skill, began to reconsider their own biases. The girl's quiet determination had a subtle but powerful influence on those around her. Changing hearts without a single boast or demand, she also found moments of quiet reflection. At night, sitting under the wide-open sky, she would watch the stars and think about the journey that had brought her here. The loneliness she had once felt, the judgment, the whispers, and the rejection of the auction, all of it now seemed like a distant memory, softened by the care and respect she was receiving. She understood that patience and quiet courage had carried her to this moment, and she felt a deep gratitude for the cowboy who had stepped forward when no one else would. Over time, she began to bond with the animals on the ranch. Horses that had been wary of strangers now nuzzled her gently, cows followed her calmly, and even the small barn cat would curl up beside her as she worked. These connections brought her comfort and joy. She began to understand that her gentle, observant nature was a strength, not a weakness. She had been patient and kind to herself, and now the world was responding in kind. The cowboy also became a steady presence in her life. He did not treat her as a possession or merely as a worker. Instead, he guided her, encouraged her, and respected her opinions and abilities. Sometimes he would quietly observe her, smiling at the careful way she worked, the thoughtfulness in her movements, and the determination in her eyes. Other times he would offer small lessons, teaching her about the land, the animals, and the skills she would need to thrive. She learned quickly, absorbing his words and applying them with precision. As the seasons changed, the girl's confidence grew. She no longer felt the same fear or uncertainty that had accompanied her to the auction platform. She had learned that strength could be quiet, that patience could be powerful, and that the right person's recognition could change a life entirely. She began to take initiative, suggesting ways to improve tasks on the ranch, helping the younger workers, and sharing her knowledge with the few other girls in the town who sought guidance. Her influence spread quietly but surely, and people began to respect her not only for her abilities but for the integrity and kindness she carried in every action. One day, as she tended the animals, she noticed some children from the town watching her from the edge of the fence. She smiled at them, and they smiled back, hesitant at first, but gradually gaining confidence. She invited them closer, showing them how to care for the smaller animals and guiding them gently. In this moment, she realized that she could be a teacher, a role model, and an example of patience and courage to others who had once doubted themselves. She saw the ripple effect of kindness and respect. Understanding that one person's recognition could inspire hope in many, life on the ranch was not always easy. There were long days of work, challenges with the animals, and moments of frustration when things did not go as planned. Yet the girl faced each obstacle with the quiet strength that had carried her. Through the auction and the judgment of the crowd, she learned to solve problems, to work through difficulties, and to trust in her own abilities. Each day brought new lessons, new challenges, new opportunities to grow. The cowboy watched her progress with pride, knowing that she had become more than just a worker on his ranch. She had become a part of the family, someone whose strength, patience, and courage had transformed not only her own life, but also the lives of those around her. He had seen her potential when no one else would, and he had been rewarded by the steady, unwavering growth of her character and skill. Over time, the town's perception of the girl shifted. People who had once whispered and doubted began to approach her with respect. They sought her advice, admired her work, recognized the quiet determination that had carried her from the auction platform to a place of stability and growth. She had become a symbol of patience, courage, and dignity, proof that quiet strength could overcome prejudice and misunderstanding. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in hues of pink and orange, the girl sat on the porch of the ranch, watching the animals settle in for the night. She reflected on the journey that had brought her here, the whispers, the judgment, the long hours of waiting on the auction platform, and realized how far she had come. The life she had once dreamed of, full of hope and possibility, was now becoming a reality. She had endured the silence, the fear, and the uncertainty, and in doing so, she had discovered the power within herself to thrive. She thought of the cowboy, whose recognition and kindness had changed everything. She felt gratitude, respect, and a deep sense of trust. He had not only seen her worth when no one else would, but he had also nurtured it, providing guidance and encouragement without ever taking away her independence or voice. She understood now that kindness, patience, and belief in another person's potential could transform lives in ways that were profound and lasting. As the stars began to twinkle in the night sky, the girl felt a sense of peace and accomplishment. She had been overlooked and underestimated, yet she had endured. She had remained quiet, patient, and strong, and in the end, someone had seen her true value. She had found a place where she was respected, where her abilities mattered, and where her quiet courage was recognized. For the first time in her life, she felt fully capable, fully valued, and fully alive. The next morning, she rose early, as she had learned to do on the ranch. She tended to the animals with care, prepared breakfast, and went about her work with a quiet confidence. She was no longer the timid, overlooked girl from the auction platform. She was a capable, respected young woman, ready to face the challenges of each day with strength and patience. She knew there would be hard days ahead, but she also knew that she could handle them. She had already overcome so much, and now she carried the lessons of perseverance, courage, and self-respect into everything she did. The quiet Apache girl had found more than a new home. She had found a new life. She had discovered her own strength, gained recognition and respect, and realized that patience, dignity, and courage could open doors that others might keep closed. The cowboy's faith in her had made all the difference, but it was her own quiet resilience that allowed her to seize the opportunity and transform it into a life full of possibility. And as the sun rose each morning over the ranch, casting golden light across the fields and animals, the girl worked with steady hands, a calm heart, and a quiet smile. She knew that she was no longer invisible, no longer overlooked, and no longer defined by the prejudices of others. She had found her place, her purpose, and her own quiet strength, and the world had finally begun to recognize it.